Welcome to the Old Man of Three Things with JJ Redick and Nekias Duncan and Steve Jones at the Dunker Spot. Fellas, how are we doing on this lovely Sunday?
Doing pretty well. Still reeling from last Sunday's result, but that's neither here nor there, or last Monday's result. But doing well overall.
All right. Steve?
Oh, feeling great. Ready to open up the bakery, to unleash some of these takes.
Oh, and hopefully we'll have some takes. I feel like there were so many different ways we could go for this week's episode. The Clippers, of course. OKC now tied for first, but then lose to the Detroit Pistons today. Of course, the 70-point games and the 60-point games and the overall lack of defense and effort across the NBA and how players can just basically pick a number and score that number with ease. With no regard for any level of skill or shot making. Instead, though, we're going to go with some all-star discussion. The starters were announced. The reserves will be announced in the next week. I feel like there's a lot of different ways we can go here, but I want to start with this. Did either of you have any issue with the all-star starters? And again, 50% of this is the fan vote. And that's sort of the point of the All-Star game, right? They want to see certain players. But did you have any issue with any of the All-Stars that were named starters?
Nekias, this is your bag. Go ahead, big dog.
I guess just a small one with the East guards, and while also acknowledging that he would have made my team anyway if I got to pick the reserves and all that good stuff. But I would have had Jalen Brunson over Damian Lillard. For that second starting spot alongside Tyrese Haliburton. But aside from that, not really. You could quibble with the LA folks with the West, LeBron versus Anthony Davis, considering what Brow's done defensively this year. But honestly, the Brunson thing was the only one. And even that isn't a super big deal.
Okay.
The Brunson-Lillard discourse felt a little strong to me. I think they're both all-stars. I did find it a little ironic considering that same thing happened to Dame with Luka just a few years ago, where there was a split and Luka got in because he had the fan vote, and now Dame gets in because he has the fan vote. I think they're both incredible. I think all-star voting, we don't have to call it a crime. BJ Armstrong was the lead vote getter in 1994 for the Eastern Conference All-Stars. Things happen. It'll be okay. It's all good. I thought it was cool that Tyrese Haliburton got the nod as the lead vote getter from the fans, the media, and the players. I thought it was cool that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander got the acknowledgement that he did and was able to start. I didn't think that was going to happen. I thought it was going to be Steph Curry, just like I had LeBron penciled in. Shai has played at this level, and he's arrived. So I think there's some cool stuff that happens that balances some things out outside of just yelling.
But the yelling is fun.
We can all be so mad. And again, we sometimes go on rants on this show, and this is not a rant. But I will say, episode 1 of Islands in the League last year, I broke down why I think there should be 15 All-Stars named. No reserves, no injury replacements. 15 guys named every year. And the reason being is simple math. At no point in time has it been harder to make an All-Star game than it is currently in today's NBA. With 15 roster spots, two-way players, 30 teams, you're looking at less than 5% of the NBA that has a chance to make an All-Star game. You look at the 1950s, 1960s, 8 teams, 9 teams, whatever, 20% roughly made the All-Star game. For most of the NBA's history, 10 to 20% of the league made the All-Star game, and now it's under 5. I've seen a lot of reaction to a number of people who have brought up we should have 15. Including my video last year. One thing I'll say, a common reaction to the idea of having 15 spots per conference is that it devalues the All-Star game. Here's the thing. If you're saying that, then you're also saying all the All-Star spots for decades and decades when it was easier to make an All-Star game has also been devalued. So you just punked yourself. There you go. Also, should the league have said, you know what? We're good with 8 teams. We're good with 9 teams. 14 seems right. 15 seems good. 23 with the Dallas Mavericks in 1980, 1981. We're good. We're good. No. So we're going to quibble about this for the next 25 minutes about who's getting snubbed on all of our all-star lists. But you know what? If we got to 15, I bet we'd quibble a little less, and I'd bet it'd be a little more fair. And I'm all for fairness in this world. I'm all for fairness. Any reaction to that? Because I want to hear your guys' thoughts. You guys are two of the smartest guys I know. I want to get your thoughts on that.
I actually had a question for you as you spoke about like the counter arguments that you're getting about devaluing the All-Star game. Have we figured out how to put appropriate value on what an All-Star appearance means yet? Because that's the thing that kind of annoys me every year. And Steve laughs at me when I yell about the fan vote and stuff. I'm just like, okay, if this is going to be a showcase just for the fans, this is fan service, this is a league event, cool. Let's not attach contract incentives into it. When we have these Hall of Fame conversations, let's not say player X was a 9-time All-Star if it really doesn't matter. I recognize MVPs, championships, All-NBA, that matters more. But if we're assigning any kind of significance to All-Star appearances, let's be serious about it. And if not, then we really don't have to quibble about any of it if it doesn't matter. So I guess for you, like, what value do you put in the All-Star game or All-Star appearances for players?
It's a great question, Nekias. And I look at it from a player's perspective and what the meaning is. It's validation, it's recognition, it's clout, it's currency, it's all of those things. In terms of real world difference to your life, will you maybe get a couple extra brand deals? Yeah, okay. But to your point, no incentive has been given to this. Desmond Bane, whether he makes an All-Star over the next 5 seasons or not, is going to make $207 million from the Memphis Grizzlies. That is a fact. So in some ways, you're right. It doesn't matter. In some ways, it does. Because I think every player growing up, watching All-Star Saturday, watching All-Star Sunday, we dream of being named an All-Star. And you think about how many guys have made multiple All-Star games that didn't get that All-NBA. All-NBA is so hard. Mm-hmm. It's like the same, year to year, it's the same roughly 20 to 22 guys. Hey, guess what? You can sneak in an All-Star game as the 38th guy. You can sneak in an All-Star game as the 45th guy. You can. If your team does really well, Detroit Pistons, Rasheed Wallace being the 4th guy, Atlanta Hawks, Kyle Korver being the 4th guy. That you tell me it doesn't matter to Kyle Korver? Of course it matters. He retires and he said, I made an All-Star game. That's a big deal for a player. So I think it's more about the currency, the clout, the validation, the recognition than it is about any real world material difference in a player's life. And that's all it is. It's a valid question, and that's sort of my reaction to it.
JJ, can I ask an additional question?
Sure.
You've mentioned the player perspective, obviously on the other side now. How do you, as we get into these reserves, kind of balance the individual impact, the individual performance versus this team is winning, this person is impacting winning? And do you ever catch yourself, like, not saying that, okay, this team needs to have 2 players or anything like that, but do you ever be like, this is kind of odd. I feel very strongly that this team should have 2. They're in 7th place. Does that ever cross your mind at all?
Of course. I think I place more value on winning on All NBA. At least I did last year when I voted. For All-Star, I look at it as certainly like I voted for the All-Star starters, right? I had a media vote. And I looked at it through the lens of which players are impacting winning, but also which players are stars and which players are having great individual seasons. Very broadly, there were a couple spots that I had a very difficult decision with. As I'm making my list tonight, the point you just made, where it's like, I want to reward the Timberwolves. I want to reward the Boston Celtics. But also, LeBron James and Anthony Davis should be in the All-Star game. So it's hard. It's very hard, which is why, again, I think the decision-making gets easier if we have 15. Let's argue some, guys. Who wants to start with their 7 Eastern Conference reserves?
Oh, I'll go first. I'll get yelled out and get out of the way.
Let's go.
All right. All right. For the East, I have in the backcourt Donovan Mitchell and Jalen Brunson. In the front court, I have Bam Adebayo, Paolo Banchero, Julius Randle. And my wild cards are Tyrese Maxey and Jaylen Brown.
All right.
Set the charcoal up. Let's go.
All right. I like it. So no Trae Young. I think that's the obvious one there that you omitted. Okay. I like your picks. I want to hear yours, Nekias. I'll give you mine, and then we can discuss.
Got you. I will give you mine. I also have a kind of a follow-up to Steve's question to you a little bit earlier. But for me, in the backcourt, Jalen Brunson and Tyrese Maxey. In the front court, I have Julius Randle, Bam Adebayo, Jaylen Brown. My wild card is Donovan Mitchell. That's more of he's only played 34 games type beat. He's obviously been elite this year, but he's a wild card for me. Last wild card spot for me is Trae Young.
Ooh.
Say your front court again. Your three reserves in the front court.
Randle, Bam, and Jaylen Brown.
A little split vote here on Banchero. Interesting. All right. So mine, I had in the backcourt, if I was to be able to select this, and obviously none of us get to select this. This is all the coaches. I want to be explicit again. I have no say in this. Coaches are deciding this. All right. So I had Donovan Mitchell and Jalen Brunson. I think Jalen Brunson had a very valid argument to be an all-star starter. Came very close, as you mentioned, Steve. Front court, I had Bam and Jaylen Brown. My two wild cards were Tyrese Maxey and Trae Young. And this is where I value just individuals' spectacular season versus lack of winning. And Trae Young, I think, should be an all-star this year. The last front court spot I have gone back and forth with on this. And again, I don't know when the coaches decided to vote or if they have voted yet, because every coach is different. Some head coaches do it. Some guys have their film guys do it. I'll be honest with you. It's true.
I did it.
Yeah. Some guys have their assistant coaches do it. Yeah. Everybody's different. And it really came down to Banchero and Randle for me. If you had asked me 2 weeks ago, I think it was probably Banchero. If I had to vote today, which I don't have a vote because I'm not a coach, I would go Julius Randle. Which I think basically where we're at with this is that Young, Randle, Banchero, those are the guys that I think when we talk later this week, it's like one of those guys could potentially get snubbed. I think Jaylen Brown gets in. I think you have to put two Celtics guys in the All-Star game.
Got you. And then my question for you, again, a quick follow-up off of what Steve asked you. Are you of the mind that maybe not every playoff team, but that a playoff team should have at least one? Because that's ultimately the struggle I had with Paolo. Because he's been quite good, but then you dig into some of the numbers. Obviously, his context isn't great, and since Franz has been down, the spacing is even worse for him. So, you can wave away at least some of the efficiency stuff. But it's the efficiency stuff, plus Orlando, they've had to slide after the hot start, plus Orlando has technically lost Paolo's minutes. And you get into some of that stuff, and it's just like, I don't know what to do. Like, how much better obviously the Magic are better than the Raptors. How much better has Paolo been than Scottie this year? And I didn't have Scottie in.
It's a fair question. Which is why I think, again, we do this as of today. We're not doing this as of Jan 1, pre-OG Anunoby trade, right? It's like they have been great. So they've won games, and now all of a sudden it's like, well, let's reward that. In the Western Conference, and we'll get there in a second, I'm going through this list. I think the Western Conference probably is even harder than the Eastern Conference. And I made a list of guys. I'm going to be honest with you. I made a list of guys. I have like 6 more guys that I didn't put on the list that were like, could potentially be all-stars. And guess what? I didn't even realize this till you brought this question up. Wasn't a Pelicans player on there, right? And they're technically in the playoffs right now. So I think it's really hard to sort of delineate in real time when we're doing this. And a great decision or a great vote 2 weeks ago versus today. I think about the media vote. Like, we had until January 19th or 20th at midnight. Well, a lot of people probably voted January 13th. I mean, whenever we got the email, it was like, I get a reminder every day. But I'm literally, I set an alarm on the Monday of the week that it was due. It was due on Saturday at 11:59 p.m. I set an alarm for Saturday morning. I'm counting all the games up until then, right? So I think it's really hard, Nekias, and I don't think there's a right answer to that. And to your point about Paolo and Scotty, again, it's like, what's your preference there? Because Scotty's having a great season, and the Magic, particularly since Franz went out in early January, have significantly trailed off.
And then just very quickly, as I always do, like the short list, longer list and stuff, I'm not going to go through all of those names.
Yes.
One guy I will say should get consideration if he doesn't ultimately end up getting it. Jared Allen should be in this conversation for either a wild card spot or a front court spot. That man has been very good since Evan Mobley been down, and he's been even better in January on both ends of the floor. So I just want to throw his name out there very quickly.
We could make a list and we could just keep going till we get to like player 60 or 70. But my short list was Siakam, Scotty, Jared Allen, Porzingis, and of course, Derek White. Of course, Derek White. But if you had to say, in all seriousness, if you're looking at obviously the two starting guards, the next four, which I think there's a little bit of disagreement here because Steve didn't have Trae Young in the game. But if you're looking at the top six guards, who's the seventh guard in the Eastern Conference? I know there was a 2 weeks little slump there. That's probably Derek White. Like, I think he's been the seventh best guard in the Eastern Conference this year. I think that's fair.
That's fair. Like Derek White, I'm trying to think other guards that may be in the conversation. I guess quickly, how have you felt about DeMar DeRozan's season this year?
Exactly how I feel about the Chicago Bulls.
I
Yeah.
see.
Yep.
Okay, well said.
Yeah. All right, let's do the Western Conference real quick. Luka, Shai, KD, LeBron, Jokic, the starters. Let's reverse order here. Nekias, you start with your Western Conference reserves.
Oh boy. With quick apologies to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 names on my short list, which isn't really a short list then. But anyway, in the backcourt, I have De'Aaron Fox and Stephen Curry. For the front court, Kawhi Leonard, Anthony Davis, Domantas Sabonis. And my wild cards are Anthony Edwards and Devin Booker.
Okay. Steve's reaction says a lot there.
Well, that's my 7.
So you do a pod with someone for 3 years.
I was really counting on Nekias to tap that Paul George button. I thought Sabonis was going to be my big joker, but no.
Okay. All right. You know what's wild is those were my 7 too. Those were my 7 too. And it's interesting because I think you bring up the question that you asked, Nekias, I think is really valid. And you're looking at this, and the Minnesota Timberwolves are currently tied for first place, and they're getting one, like according to our list, right? On all of our lists in the Western Conference, they're getting one All-Star in as a reserve. Mm-hmm. No Cat, no Gobert. Clippers playing out of their minds. They get one All-Star in. The Lakers get 2 in. The Kings get 2 in on our list, right? It's really hard, but we can also acknowledge the individual seasons that some of these guys are having. So those are my 7. I think the toughest ones for me were Gobert and Paul George, because if you look at some of these advanced metrics in terms of impact on winning, all the defensive metrics, Gobert has been awesome. And then Paul George has played like Paul George. He's been as efficient as he's been. He's shooting over 40% from 3. They figured out this hierarchy of playmaking and shooting and usage with the Clippers. Those were the 2 guys that I had a hard time leaving off. Sabonis is having a fucking unbelievable season. Fox had a stretch there when he came back from injury where he was playing as good as any guard outside of Luka and Shai. So it's hard to keep those guys off for me.
This is why I appreciate with our pod, we do the all-star check-ins. So I can shout out the guys as they're playing well. Because like when we did the check-in, I think the first one we had, I had Alperen Şengün as an all-star. I either had him as a reserve or a wild card, but I had him on. And now he's further down the list right now. I kind of teased this on, our prediction pod heading into the new year. And I'll quickly ask you, how have you felt about James Harden's season as we've gotten a greater sample now?
He's been fantastic. Again, I'll go back to what I said about the Eastern Conference. If you look at Luka, Shai, Booker, Fox, Steph, and Anthony Edwards, I don't think you can make a case that James Harden is deserving of an all-star spot over those guys. Now, we can make an argument if we get to 15. I'm going to keep harping on this until Adam Silver changes the fucking rule.
You got to get him back on a sell him.
This is literally, so when we had him on, they were like, hey, we should do this again. Let's do like a mid-season check-in or like a post-all-star break check-in. I'm like, absolutely. And there were, again, they gave us 30 minutes. I stretched it out to like 42 because, whatever. Adam was very gracious with his time, but he was late to his next meeting. And I'm thinking to myself, there were like 4 questions, even at the time, that I was like, I didn't get to fire. And one of them was the all-star question. I didn't feel like in that short amount of time it was that pertinent, but if I get him back on, I want to have him on. The 2 guys I wanted to ask you about, going back to, our conversation, which we all took some heat on, which is fine. The Wemby Chet conversation. Like, if we were to say there's 15 guys, or like, how close are those 2 guys to you in terms of the next group? If we're stopping it at 12, how close are those guys to being all-stars this year?
I think Wemby will be closer for me in the all-star context, especially the way he's playing. I think there might be more juice for him there with the defense, with the offense. I could see Wemby sneaking in. What do you say, Nekias?
Oh boy. If we extend this out to 15, I think technically Wemby would be 17 for me and Chet would be 18.
Here's a question for both of you then. Where would Jalen Williams be for you?
Like 20 to 22 range, probably, because I still get Şengün back in there.
Okay. All right.
You mentioned the Pelicans a little bit earlier. Like, I have Brandon Ingram on my short list.
Yeah. Deservedly so. I wasn't earlier insinuating that Brandon Ingram isn't an all-star level player, or Zion's not an all-star level player. It's just hard. It's hard with them because of their roster, and it doesn't feel like when we talk about all-star, right? It feels like there's a night-to-night dominance, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't feel like anybody on the Pelicans has done that as consistently as the players we named. I think that's fair.
I had Ingram in early. Do you think their quote unquote sacrifice and playing together ends up hurting them in this space specifically? Because my question was going to be, hey, y'all, Jamal Murray or CJ McCollum, do we talk about either of them in the way we should? Or are they now just the Mike Conley of the Western Conference where, yes, great, but also?
It's interesting with Jamal. RJ and I have talked about this all season, where RJ's like, I think Jamal should be an all-star, right? And it's hard. Again, we look at the list of guards we just named. It's hard for you to say, well, given Denver's in 4th, Jamal missed some time. Jamal's had an awesome season to me. He has. He's 21-7, good efficiency. He hasn't been individually as consistent as these guys, as dominant as these guys night to night. I think so much of I don't want to use the word aura, but so much of like the legend of Jamal Murray, and he is a legend, let's be clear, is based upon his playoff success. I mean, he has the highest point per game increase in terms of regular season for his career, postseason for his career, of any player in NBA history. And that's not what the All-Star game is, right? It's just not. Şengün was the guy, I think, for me too, that I kind of wanted to highlight. I'm glad you brought him up. It goes back to the winning thing. Houston has trailed off a little bit. I think overall, just as a general sort of take on him and the growth we've seen in year 3, I feel like this is a guy that's going to make 8 or 9 All-Star games, multiple All-NBA teams. If Houston builds this thing right, be in the conversation, at least for, that top 5 or 6 conversation of MVP. I really believe this guy is that good. Am I off base with that?
I don't think you're off base. And again, someone that had him on my all-star roster earlier in the year, like I think you could just see what kind of impact he can have offensively when you actually run things through him. And defensively, I was impressed with the effort early on. It still wasn't great in terms of just the overall productivity, but that's why you bring in Fred. That's why you bring in Dillon Brooks. That's why you get the jump from Jabari Smith, who's been really good defensively. Hope he gets back to form soon. But I think with the defense slipping / Houston just not being able to win once they hit this recent stretch, like that just kind of hurt the case. But like moving forward, I'm not going to be surprised at all if he makes the team next year. Like I think he's already, even if he doesn't make the All-Star team this year, he's very clearly an All-Star talent. I think that much for the people that have watched him. Like I think that much is clear.
I would say he's on that trajectory because if you watch how Houston's built, what they built around, if you're a coach in a coaches meeting, you're thinking, okay, how do we contain Şengün? What do we do with his handoffs? What do we do with him in the post? Do we double? He's entering those kind of conversations to me, which I think is important. And you mix in the defense, still some question marks, but it's further away from the liability zone than it was before. And so I think he keeps adding, he keeps building, he keeps stacking, he stays aggressive. He's on that track.
Last point I wanted to make was just on Markkanen and Utah. If you look at last year, 23-24 through 47 games. They're 24-23 through 47 games. Markkanen, very similar stats. Little down in points per game, but rebounds about the same, shooting slightly better from three. It's interesting because I think one of the problems we're going to have with All-NBA, with All-Star going forward, hopefully, of course, is that more players are going to play. Markkanen is having an All-Star season. And I mean, he was on my short list, but he's not, I don't think he has a legitimate case where last year it was very clear, like Markkanen's going to make the All-Star game, right? Similar success in terms of wins, losses, similar stats, similar efficiency, all the stuff, having a great season. More guys are playing. More guys are playing more games. This is going to get harder and harder. I mean, assuming most of these guys play 65 games, dude, I can't even imagine what the All-NBA voting is going to be like. It's going to be difficult.
Ooh, that's going to be nasty. I guess one quick feather in the cap for Lauri, if you want to try to make the case for him, plus 4.5 with him on, minus 7.7 with him off per PPP stats. So if you want to get into some of that impact stuff and then just the general usage of him within Utah's offense, you can make a case there. But to your point, it's such a deep field and such a talented field. It feels weird that Lauri Markkanen is a shortlist candidate versus someone who should be like a surefire. If Lauri Markkanen was in the East, he's just a front court reserve, yes?
Right. Yeah.
And in the West, it's we talked about 8 to 9, 10 other guys before we. Oh, right. Lauri's also really freaking good.
And to your point, it's also weird that we don't have 15 roster spots. Guys, always fun. Always fun catching up. Appreciate you. And I'm glad. I mean, for the most part, we were all on the same page on this. Not much to argue about. And I'm glad we got to name a number of players that are having all-star worthy seasons. And again, say it again. We're not deciding this, okay? I don't think the film guy in San Antonio is going to listen to me, Steve, and Nekias and our all-star reserves and make his votes based on that, because I'm pretty sure Pop's not voting. All right. All right. Thank you, guys.